Hello everyone! Thanks for tuning in to find out what else I saw in August that I didn't already tell you about. Let's dive right in. Movie number 1 is Where Danger Lives, a suspenseful noir from 1950 in which Robert Mitchum stars as a young doctor who treats a patient who attempted suicide. This young woman, played by Faith Domure, abruptly leaves the hospital the next day, but taken with Mitchum, she invites him to pay a call at the home she shares, so she says, with her father. A romance develops in no time at all, but when a violent accident occurs, the two lovers flee for Mexico, believing the police are hot on their trail. From the start here, you know Mitchum's young doctor is making a naive mistake in getting involved with this mystery woman, and you know she's up to no good. You're just not sure how the inevitable twisted tale is going to play out. The leads do well, Mitchum's character fighting a concussion for half the film, and Domure, who I associate with the sci-fi horror films It Came From Beneath the Sea and This Island Earth, both 1955, gives a noteworthy performance as the disturbed and unpredictable femme fatale. Third billing goes to Claude Rains, whose part is small but significant, and being Claude Rains, of course he dominates every second of his screen time. Also appearing as the wholesome girlfriend nurse that Mitchum gets distracted away from is Maureen O'Sullivan, whose husband John Farrow directed this film. Movie number 2 is another noir that stars Robert Mitchum, Angel Face. This one came out in 1953 and co-stars Jean Simmons as a rich, scheming, hungry-eyed young woman who sets her heart on having Robert Mitchum for herself, Mitchum this time being an ambulance driver who once again is already involved with someone he works with. Things get romantic between them, but Mitchum has his suspicions that the sob stories Simmons is pouring in his ear about the way her stepmother treats her and her father are lies, and that Simmons does not have pure intentions. The cast also includes Herbert Marshall and Barbara O'Neill as the parents, with Mona Freeman as Mitchum's on-again, off-again girlfriend, Leon Ames as a slick lawyer, and Kenneth Tobey as Mitchum's friendly rival. Otto Preminger directs, and as he did with Laura 9 years before, Preminger incorporates a dreamy quality here in scenes where Simmons wanders the big empty house or contemplates her next move while playing the film's theme, written by Dimitri Tomkin, on the piano. Scenes of action are minimal, but when they come, they're swift and startling. Mona Freeman is especially good as a woman who won't take any guff from Mitchum, but has the generosity to listen when he asks for another chance, and sees straight through Simmons' phony act. This next one needs a little setup. Earlier this year, I did a much-requested book review of Wuthering Heights by Emily Brontë, and as part of that discussion, I also talked about 5 different adaptations. But while I was working on that video, I began to suspect that I had only seen a small portion of one of these adaptations, and that really bothered me, because if I haven't seen a movie, I have no business reviewing it. So a few months later, I decided to settle the question once and for all and watch it. Here are my thoughts on movie number 3, the 1992 film Emily Brontë's Wuthering Heights, which stars Ralph Fiennes and Juliette Binoche as doomed lovers Heathcliff and Kathy Earnshaw. My suspicions were confirmed, I'm afraid. I must have only seen a few clips from this back in the day, and that's my loss, because I enjoyed this version more than any of the others I've seen. I think this version is the best of both worlds. It's a faithful adaptation of the book that shows the entire story, not just half of it, and doesn't skimp on the revenge plotline, and it's a solid film, well made, well acted, and aesthetically pleasing. The film's got a ton of atmosphere. The first 10 minutes alone feel like the prologue for a Dracula film. The score by Ryuichi Sakamoto is magnificent. The exteriors are fascinating. The location used for the heights is appropriately spooky and gothic, especially during a raging thunderstorm. And this is one of those movies that has several thunderstorms. The frame-within-a-frame storytelling is interesting. Emily Brontë herself, played by an uncredited Sinead O'Connor, introduces the tale, then we flash back to Lockwood's arrival, then we flash back even further, and for longer, until the story creatively brings us back to Lockwood's arrival by showing it from a different point of view. I think Ralph Fiennes nails it. If you see Heathcliff as a brooding anti-hero and a fierce but unfortunate lover, you get that. If you see Heathcliff as a villain, consumed by hatred and obsession and determined to destroy his enemies and their children, you get that. The film embraces his complexity without softening him too much or whitewashing the novel's harsher elements. I'm in the Heathcliff's a monster camp, and I was satisfied. Yet, I also found his portrayal moving, more than any other I've seen. Juliette Binoche likewise gives, in my opinion, a superlative performance, and it's really two performances, Cathy and Catherine, whose likeness disturbs Heathcliff long after the mother is gone. Binoche was criticized for her performance, particularly for her irrepressible French accent, and with Wuthering Heights being an English classic, her casting is puzzling, but while her accent is apparent at times, it's not so distracting, and I really liked her interpretation of the main role. It's true to the character without being so infuriating that I wanted to walk out of the room. These two are very much the focus of the film, but the rest of the characters are expertly cast as well, including Simon Shepherd as an increasingly unhappy and wan Edgar Linton, and especially Janet McTeer as Ellen Dean. I thought she was great. She and Binoche and the cameraman and the lighting crew and everyone involved made the I Am Heathcliff scene just perfect. I think that was my favorite scene in the film. I also like that Hareton, played by Jason Riddington, gets so much screen time, which helps flesh out the second half of the story. But if you're not already somewhat in the know, I'm afraid you're still going to struggle a bit. It was also hard to see Jeremy Northam playing a vicious cur, even though he's still not the cruelest Hindley, and while they do an impressive job smoothly incorporating every important beat in just 105 minutes, what happens to Isabella and how Linton ends up at the Heights is fudged a little, but that's okay. By my reckoning, the less we see of Linton, the better. No offense to Jonathan Firth. So if anybody were to ask me what version of Wuthering Heights they should see, I would probably recommend this one. It's thorough, but not as lengthy as a miniseries. It's accessible, and while it's appropriately dark and gloomy, it's surprisingly enjoyable to watch. I might even say pleasant, but I don't know if I'd go that far. It's still Wuthering Heights. Movie number 4 is 1951's Cause for Alarm. Loretta Young stars as a housewife whose convalescent husband, Barry Sullivan, has her mail a letter to the district attorney that she doesn't know accuses her and his doctor of conspiring to kill him. When Young finds out the letter's contents, she must rush to try to get it back before it's delivered. It's tough to see Loretta Young, with an unglamorous sheen of perspiration on her face, get browbeaten and harangued by her ill and ill-tempered husband, who has more than his heart condition on his mind. It's a diabolical plot, and everything in the world seems to be against her as she dashes madly around the house and around the neighborhood, making amateurish mistakes in her panic. It's a pretty straightforward film, with some memorable points: the hot summer day, the little boy pretending to be Hopalong Cassidy, the fussy postman determined to follow all USPS regulations, the nosy woman next door. It can feel a bit formulaic, what with its internal monologue and obligatory flashback, but it's a tidy little suspense film. Movie number 5 is 1954's The Sea Shall Not Have Them, a very fine British war film in which 3 airmen plus an air commodore clutching a briefcase of very important secret papers are left bobbing in a dinghy between England and occupied territory after their plane crashes. They must endure harsh wind and rain and cold while drifting dangerously close to the Germans. Simultaneously, the film follows the efforts of an air rescue boat and its crew members, a so-called Sea Otter rescue plane, and base operations at the aerodrome. It's a solid and gripping wartime adventure, combining two things I really enjoy, a World War II story and a lifeboat survival story. Though, in this case, it's a dinghy, not a lifeboat, but doesn't matter. It's got a surprisingly warm sense of humor as well, with several funny lines from colorful characters on the raft, on the boat, and back at home. It has well-balanced and well-fleshed-out storylines, yet things constantly keep moving. The cast is led by Michael Redgrave and Dirk Bogarde in The Dinghy, with Nigel Patrick as the hard-on-the-outside, soft-on-the-inside flight sergeant, Anthony Steele as skipper of the rescue boat, Griffith Jones as the group captain, Anton Diffring as a shot-down German, and various others. We watched this one on YouTube, and I definitely recommend it. Movie number 6 is 1950's Rocketship X-M, in which a crew of 4 men and a woman embark on the first journey to the moon. By mistake, they end up far nearer to the planet Mars, an opportunity the team leader says is too good to pass up. This was one of the first serious space travel films, handling the scientific and technological aspects in a realistic, or at least convincing, way. The film was written, produced, and directed by Kurt Newman, who also directed The Fly. It has fairly modest, but still impressive visual effects and matte paintings, and there's one lengthy sequence where the film changes from black and white to a reddish sepia tint, representing the rusty appearance on Mars, similar to what was done in 1959's The Angry Red Planet, but easier on the eyes. Much of the plot of Rocketship X-M has to do with the journey, but there's a secondary focus on the crew's interactions. Nobody really makes a big deal about there being a woman on board, except the lead character, the pilot, played by Lloyd Bridges, who relentlessly tries to get Osa Massen's dedicated chemist to loosen up, meaning to remember that she's a woman and respond to his flirtatious quips. And this is where the movie falters. Their dialogue is corny and weak and just cools the momentum. Moreover, while the film distinguishes itself by featuring an intelligent woman taking part in a dangerous mission, it then proceeds to diminish her abilities, with the character herself criticizing her so-called feminine weaknesses. I'm not offended by this, but it does get silly, and the smirking condescension is annoying. The last act of the film did surprise me, though. What they find on Mars is unexpected and thought-provoking, spawning social commentary. And then the dark final outcome brought back that punch of realism that the film started with. Movie number 7 is 1933's Private Detective 62, a crime comedy directed by Michael Curtiz, in which William Powell stars as a guy who falls into the private detective business accidentally and turns out to be pretty good at it. But he hits a snag when his partner gives him a job framing a woman he's falling in love with. This film was sandwiched between Powell's other recurring detective roles as Philo Vance and Nick Charles. It's a pretty snappy picture that co-stars Margaret Lindsay as the intended victim, Arthur Hole as Powell's lousy partner, and Ruth Donnelly as his assistant. It's pre-code, and that's how they get away with a lot of innuendo and extramarital affairs, which is what most of the so-called detecting consists of, husbands trying to catch cheating wives in the act, or wanting to frame them so they can divorce them. It's pretty sordid stuff, and Powell's increasingly disgusted with it, but it all leads to a surprisingly wholesome and fun ending. Movie number 8 is 1986's Aliens. I know, I just reviewed Aliens at the end of May. Here's what happened. In that video, I talked a little about the special edition versus the theatrical edit. I had seen the special edition first a few years ago, but the theatrical cut is what was on Prime. It was going to be leaving Prime in a short while, and so I felt this rush to see it, and then I ended up reviewing it. There was no need for the rush because it was back free on Prime in like a couple of months. It's there now. But if I hadn't felt that pressure, I probably wouldn't have watched it and definitely wouldn't have reviewed it, so I guess it all works out. But When we watched the theatrical cut, I ended up missing a couple things that I remembered from before. Well, a couple weeks ago, Amazon Prime suddenly recommended the special edition version with the big grinning queen close-up that I don't like, and I said, "Are you kidding me? I could have held out and reviewed this instead?" And then I wondered if I should watch it, or at least watch part of it. But I had just seen it twice, the second time going through it to get images for my review, which was a nerve-wracking experience in certain parts of the movie. And I thought, no, I can't. It hasn't been long enough. I don't want to see it again so soon. What if it starts to get stale? But I kept thinking about it, and I told my mom the situation, and she was like, "I wouldn't mind watching it again." So, with the theatrical cut still fresh on my mind, I watched the special edition again. And here's my take on it. The bulk of what the studio insisted on excising, because a theater can fit in more showtimes for a shorter movie, hence the studio can make more money, I have that on good authority, the bulk of this material should, in my opinion, have been kept in. The reveal that Ripley had a daughter on Earth is pivotal to that character's development and her connection with Newt and their relationship, which is really the emotional bastion of the whole film. I think it's interesting to see the colony in somewhat working order before its collapse, so you can contrast that with what the colonial Marines find on their arrival later. Plus, you see more of LV-426 and get a hint of how the xenomorphs infiltrated. I believe this little moment where Ripley hesitates before going inside the complex and Hicks asks if she's all right didn't make the cut. I also believe the 2 scenes with the A and B sentries were removed, and those all could have stayed. I also like the brief moment between Ripley and Hicks when she's geared up and about to go in search of Newt on her own, and they exchange first names, and he says, "Don't be gone long, Ellen," which is a short line that conveys a lot. And while I'm not sure what additional bits were part of the countdown sequence, in the longer version it's just a hair short of happening in real time, and that's cool. So there are all these little nuggets, and the theatrical cut works just fine without them, but the film is even better with them. The only parts I'd still leave out are Hudson bragging about how much powerful equipment they've got, and a pan around the empty Sulaco before everyone comes out of hypersleep. I think you can cut those and not lose anything. So now I've seen it 4 times, and I'm thinking it might end up being my favorite movie of 1986. Movie number 9 is Twilight's Last Gleaming, a 1977 political drama/thriller in which an ex-general, with the aid of a couple escaped convicts, takes over a missile silo, threatening to launch 9 ICBMs unless the President of the United States is delivered to him as a hostage. This one's a twisted story, challenging how exactly you feel about the characters at any given moment. Burt Lancaster gets top billing as the rogue general, which you may think is an echo of his role in 7 Days in May, but it isn't. But I think Charles Durning's president is really the central character. The rest of the cast includes Richard Widmark, Melvin Douglas, Paul Winfield, Joseph Cotton, Burt Young, Richard Jekyll, and very briefly Roscoe Lee Brown, among others. From a cinematic perspective, it's distinguished by a heavy use of split screens, not just to show characters in separate places talking to each other, but to show what's going on in multiple locations at once with dialogue clashing and overlapping. Opposing these are lengthy, dialogue-heavy scenes that unfold at a slower pace, but either way, the film demands that you pay attention. It's a tense and unsettling film directed by Robert Aldrich that leaves you with a cynical aftertaste. Not that I need a lot of help with that. Not just because of its general subject matter and resolution, but because of its insinuations about those who really wield absolute power and what their true intentions are. Movie number 10 is The Horror at 37,000 Feet, a 1973 TV movie about a very small group of passengers and crew aboard a flight out of London carrying in its cargo hold an altar from an ancient abbey. weird things start to happen. Bizarre winds, bursts of freezing air and ice, eerie voices, oozing goo, and it soon becomes apparent that there's an evil force on the plane. Quite an interesting cast here. Chuck Connors as the pilot, William Shatner as a defrocked priest and heavy drinker, Roy Thinnis as the architect in charge of the mysterious cargo, which came from the ancestral home of his wife, Jane Marrow. Also along for the ride are Buddy Ebsen, Lynn Loring, then married to Thinnis, not that you can tell from their scenes together, Tammy Grimes, Paul Winfield, France Nguyen, and Will Hutchins. This is one of those horror movies that manages to be scary and comical at the same time. It has its good moments, and its not-so-good moments, but the campy elements are part of the fun. All that said, I was able to enjoy its creepiness only up to a certain point. It goes in the occult direction, and the occult is something I prefer to stay away from. The first half of this reminded me of Horror Express, and the second half reminded me of The Mist. I didn't really like either of those movies that much, but in a way you could actually go kind of deep with this, interpreting it as a psychological study of how quickly people abandon societal norms and niceties in favor of self-preservation. But don't make the mistake of thinking that this is an especially profound movie. It was directed by David Lowell Rich, who did The Concorde, Airport 79. Which movie's better? That's a tough one. And movie number 11 was a long-awaited rewatch of 2019's The Vast of Night. I reviewed this film immediately after I saw it the first time in May of 2020. That's how much I liked it. Plus, I've mentioned it a couple other times besides. I thoroughly enjoy this independent little sci-fi movie, which is presented like a feature-length Twilight Zone episode. I love its retro vibe, its small-town setting, its dialogue. I could spend a couple hours just listening to the two main characters talk. The story is intriguing and right up my alley. I like the film's aura of mystery and hesitant wonder, and the artistic, sometimes audacious choices it makes. The first time I saw it, I was very tense, not knowing in what direction we were headed. This time I knew, but I'm happy to report that I got goosebumps just the same. So I still love it, and I guess I'm not going to quit recommending it to people. That just about wraps it up, although I also wanted to mention, for anyone who's curious, that I did get to finish The Goes Wrong show and loved it. I think I laughed even harder at the last 3 episodes than I did at the first 3. And then, on a whim, I checked YouTube to see if there were any new uploads of Peter Pan Goes Wrong that had escaped the copyright scanners, and there was one, so I rewatched that again. I think Peter Pan Goes Wrong is still my favorite thing this crew has come up with, but I would love it if they'd get to do a second season of The Goes Wrong show. It's just delightfully absurd escapism, and, well, we all need a little mental break now and then, don't we? I hope you enjoyed this video. As usual, I have put a list of the films I mentioned in the description, as well as some applicable links. You're welcome to share your thoughts on any of these films in the comments below, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.